Welcome everyone to the Climate and Biodiversity, the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force 5th Virtual Summit Series. And we're so excited that you're here. And we're going to start quickly with a land acknowledgement from Kim Diocampo. Usually we have Karina Gould, but she wasn't available today and has given permission to Kim to do a land acknowledgement. And Kim is a Tuolumne Miwok Huma Choctaw African American who is a member of the Sacred Sites Protection and Rights of Indigenous Tribes. SSPRIT, SSPRIT is the acronym, and a board member of Segurite Land Trust, which is an urban indigenous women's community organization working to return land to indigenous stewardship here in the Bay Area. So thank you, Kim, for being here.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Yeah, I'm a poor excuse for Karina Gould, who's an amazing person. But anyway, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Ohlone Nations, who lovingly stewarded these ancestral lands since time immemorial. And I am speaking to you from the colonizer city known as Vallejo, the home of the Karkeen Ohlone, the Bay Miwok and Patwin tribes. For those of you living in the Bay Area, you are living on the ancestral lands of Huchun, the home of the Lashan Ohlone, led by our fearless tribal leader, Karina Gould. And for me, as a California native, I'm from the Tuolumne Miwok tribe. I feel it's important, to understand the history of the land that you occupy as we recognize the colonization, the genocide and the theft that has created the inequities that we continue to experience. And so I want to honor as indigenous people strength, our courage, our resistance to colonization and capitalism, to protect our culture and traditions and our love for the sacred earth, which all protect if we expect to continue to exist. Biodiversity, which we're going to talk about, is a continuum of caring for what cares for us. It's just simple. It's that simple. If you want, we have to care for the land if we expect it to care for us. And so let me leave you with a quote from Chief Seattle from the Squamish Nation when he simply said that not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in that web. And whatever he does to the web, he does to himself because all things are connected. So let me just say, Shoktiton Onikuti Tanjikamu, which means that we are all related, and thank you.
Thank you, Kim. It's always a pleasure to be in your presence, and that was beautiful. And yes, you did an excellent job. And Karina, better no, just kidding. But Karina is amazing, but you are amazing too. So
Thank you.
for being here, and thank you for that beautiful land acknowledgement. Yeah, we're welcome to the city of Berkeley, Ohlone territory, and I'm so happy that the Ohlonies got some land back in Berkeley. There's a couple of sites here. There's a garden, and then there's the shell mound, which is huge. So praise God for that. And so welcome to um the our fifth virtual summit series, Climate and Biodiversity. I want to say that our fifth summit series title for the whole series is Climate, Colonization, and Rights for Nature, Rights for Humans and Nature. United Actions for a Just and Regenerative Future. But this one is Climate and Biodiversity. It's the first in the 5-part series. And I'm Cheryl Davila, the founder of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force, a former council member in Berkeley. And I'm also the founder of the Berkeley Equity Summit Alliance, one of the founders, which is a BIPOC Berkeley community group. And then we have Mobilize Berkeley, which is the CEMTF and the UC Berkeley's Student Environmental Resource Center. And I'm on the advisory committee for the Interfaith Council of Alameda County, the network of elected officials and staff. And I'm part of the community group Friends of Adeline. And then if that wasn't enough, I took on being a member of the KPFA local station board. So I'm continuing to be out there in the streets, opposing the genocide, to end the occupation, and to be in solidarity to free Palestine and to free Sudan, the Congo, Haiti, and free us all from oppression, greed, racism, colonization, hatred, and bigotry. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. I specifically want to thank our CEMTF Planning and Logistics Committee, Jack and Karina and myself, and the steering committee. And we have 3 new members. Thank you, Natalie, Karis, and Livy. And we're going to be hearing from Karis today. And I also want to thank the speakers today, Kim, for that great land acknowledgement, Leonida, Karis, Liz, Neil, Tiffany, and Martha. And I want to thank all of you all for being here, and thank you for your donations too. And if you didn't donate, there's still time. You can just go to CEMTF.org and click on the donate button on the homepage. And like I said, we're in our 5th year of existence, the CEMTF, and we're all volunteers working hard to bring these series and our general meetings together for you. And we mentor and guide our amazing work of our UC Berkeley College Corps Fellows for the past 2 years, who worked on an Alameda County climate scorecard in 2022 and again in 2023 and 24. And so we have an updated scorecard, which I'll be dropping in the chat. And today we're going to hear about climate and biodiversity. So what is biodiversity? I know the speakers will probably address this, but I thought I'd give the Yahoo definition, which states the variety of life in the world or in a particular habitat or ecosystem. And Webster states the biological diversity in an environment as indicated by numbers of different species of plants and animals. And when we talk about freeing Palestine, we must think about freeing ourselves from corporate greed, war, violence in our community, or to our Mother Earth, the planet. Bombs and rockets, white phosphorus, and missiles not only cause death, but an immediate humanitarian crisis and property damage, but they have long lasting hazardous toxic impacts on generations of humanity. The toxins reside in residues from the chemicals and metals and plastics and electronic waste and human waste, and all the contaminants fill the soil with widespreading pollution, and agricultural areas suffer. And in Gaza specifically, they may suffer from desertification, which is the process by which fertile land becomes desert. And it's typically a result of drought, deforestation, and inappropriate agriculture. And they also have soil erosion and land degradation, all of which affects biodiversity. So we're in a heap of trouble, as I always say, and the heap keeps getting larger and larger. Each month, it's the hottest on record. The temperatures are rising everywhere. 125 degrees, 112 here in California in Clear Lake. My sister lives there and tells me that. Hurricanes, unexpected tornadoes, and now another assassination attempt. Although, anyway, I won't go there, um but I remember those assassinations from my childhood, and I just hope and pray that doesn't start happening again. And the continued gun violence and the police killings and the recalls and taking away women's rights, Zionism, fascism, although it's here. So the heap keeps getting larger and larger. And let's not forget COVID, because we're still in COVID, and there's homelessness is still rising, mental health issues are still rising, fentanyl crisis still rising. So we need to end the wars militarily and the wars within ourselves in order to save us from the climate crisis. So ponder that for a minute while we listen to our amazing speakers. Just sit back, get your coffee, your tea, your water, your breakfast, and let's hear from our speakers today to talk about climate and biodiversity. So thank you all again for being here. So I'm not sure is
Leonida is here.
Yay! So I'm going to introduce Leonida Odongo. She's the founding director of Haki Nawiri Africa. She's calling in from Kenya. So we appreciate you being here. And I wrote your title as Advancing Social Justice in Marginalized Communities and among universities and students, but you might have something else. So go for it. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm not sure Leonida's video is working. Leonida, if you could start your video, then we can see you. If that doesn't work, well, hopefully we can hear you. Can we hear you? We were having difficulties with her connection earlier, so I'm not sure what's happening right now. We're not hearing you anyway.
If you want, we could start with the next speaker and give you a minute to get that together. Can you give us a thumbs up or something? Raise your hand.
Oh, and we just lost her again. So I think maybe
Okay.
There was
We'll start with
there was a rumor of some internet connections globally going on. So yeah, our plan B was to start with. Go ahead, Cheryl, and take it away.
Yeah. I was gonna have Natalie introduce Karis. Are you ready to do that, Natalie?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so happy to introduce Karis today. Karis Pulfer is a steering committee member and recent UC Berkeley graduate. So go ahead and take it away, Karis.
Thank you so much. Just give me a second to share my screen.
Well, Karis was one of our amazing fellows last semester, and she just graduated. And she joined our steering committee as well as Natty. So thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Hello, everyone.
If I could just say one thing first, I did give Leonida our phone number, so she may be able to call in. So we'll keep working with her to see what happens. But go ahead, Karis.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Karis Pulfer, an alumni of UC Berkeley, where I got my bachelor's in environmental science. Welcome to my presentation, where I will speak on the microbial diversity in degraded California coast estuarine sediments. I'll be talking mostly about the Aliso Creek estuary, these research methods, findings, and discussion applied to estuaries along the California coast and elsewhere in the world. This research was conducted through SPUR at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab for my senior thesis. I wanted to start with a quote I found where it states that microbial life represents the majority of Earth's biodiversity. I think this is important because it is something we don't often think about because we aren't able to see microbial life, but it is everywhere. and literally it is everywhere. At one point, while I attended UC Berkeley, I took a course called microbial ecology taught by Dr. Jill Banfield. And I learned that some microbes have the capability of living in the harshest of terrains that no other life form is able to inhabit, from extremely hot to extremely cold to extremely toxic and acidic habitats. The fact that they have adapted to places like these sheds light on how significant these microscopic organisms are and how much we can learn from them just by looking at their genetic makeup and functional genes. So, what is an estuary and why is microbial diversity important? An estuary is a freshwater river or stream that leads to the ocean. Estuaries routinely form and break down the natural sand barriers between the river and the ocean during low tide and high tide events, mixed with variations of rain patterns that also affect the naturally occurring sand barrier. In this site location, the natural sand barrier that forms is often breached by local skim borders, disrupting the natural fluctuations that occur throughout the day. The effect of this disturbance has gone unstudied, but I believe that it can have a significant effect on the microbial communities in the estuarine ecosystem. These estuarine habitats are unique and fragile as organisms adapt to the fluctuations of salinity that occurs in these tidal events that are unlike any other ecosystem. Salinity gradients form from freshwater to brackish water to saltwater. Microbial organisms consist of bacteria, archaea, viruses, fungi, protists, and microalgae. Community structure, richness, and diversity are constantly shifting as environmental variables are altered, such as sediment salinity, pH, total organic carbon, nitrogen, among other variables. These environmental variables are altered naturally and with human interference. These interferences cause short-term and long-term changes in the ecosystem's biodiversity as a whole. Microbial community diversity is absolutely essential to the health of an estuarine ecosystem as it plays key functions in metabolizing nutrients and keeping metabolic cycles of nutrients such as carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus in check. I will delve deeper into this topic, specifically nitrogen cycling, in a little bit. For now, let's just say that we should all be very thankful for the work that these microbial organisms have been putting in since the very beginning of life on Earth. For a second, I would like to look back at when the Aliso Creek Estuary, my research site, was filled with biodiversity spanning its 14 acres of native wetland and sandbar habitat. This gem of a place once flourished with native flora and fauna such as native cattails, pickleweed, tule, western steelhead trout, red-legged frogs, and the tidewater goby. The diminishing livelihood of tidewater goby has been noted in many California coastal estuarine ecosystems and hasn't been seen here in Aliso Creek in over 30 years. Looking at it now, it has been severely degraded compared to what it was back then. It is no longer suitable for native species due to excess nutrients from point and non-point sources, which I will cover later. When I conducted a field study on the vegetation in the Aliso Creek estuary last August, only invasive and non-native vegetation covered the sediment surrounding the watershed. I had hoped to look at the microbial community diversity on the rhizosphere of native vegetation, but had to look at non-native for my research because it was the only vegetation that was available. The lack of biodiversity in this area is alarming, calling for a restoration project titled the Aliso Creek Restoration Project, led by the Laguna Ocean Foundation and collaborators contributing volunteer efforts in planning the restoration. This project aims to widen the channel and provide a reintroduction of native species to the area. Microbial nitrogen cycling is a continuous cycle beginning since the formation of nitrogen and oxygen on Earth. Microbial communities work together to keep this cycle in balance for other organisms in the biosphere to thrive. Additional cycles, such as the carbon and phosphorus cycle, are also kept in check by microbial communities to maintain air, water, and sediment quality that we all like to enjoy. This image portrays an overview of point and non-point sources in which nitrogen is added to the nitrogen cycle. These sources include soil organic matter, such as plant leaf litter, absorbed via mineralization, and atmospheric nitrogen, which can leach into the ground via fixation or deposition. These sources create ammonium, which is oxidized to nitrate, beginning the previously shown nitrogen pathways. While this cycle is naturally occurring, increased nitrogen loads from human activities and chemical fertilizers wreak havoc on ecosystems, in the case of the Aliso Creek estuary, among others, causing algal blooms, depleting dissolved oxygen in the water, and killing off aquatic wildlife. It also allows invasive plants to successfully outcompete native ones as they grow rapidly and emerge earlier in the spring. Oh. To give a deeper look into the research I conducted in the area, I looked at which variables contributed significantly to the diversity and the abundance of rhizospheric bacterial communities found in the sediment of non-native and invasive emergent macrophyte Pulicaria paludosa, also known as Spanish false fleabane, along the Aliso Creek estuary. To answer this question, I asked how each environmental variable, salinity, total nitrogen, and carbon to nitrogen ratios affected the diversity of the bacterial communities. My field research methods consisted of selecting 4 transects across the restoration project boundaries, where each circle on the graph represents a location of sampling. The top 4 points are the north bounds of each transect, and the bottom 4 points are the south bounds of each transect. Within each circle, 3 rhizospheric and bulk sediment samples were extracted from the vegetation Pulicaria paludosa. In addition, I incubated 2 resin capsules at each of the 8 sample points for about 8 days at around 10 inches deep in the sediment. Notably, water levels were highly variable throughout the day, with fluctuations of the tide where it was very low in the morning, rising until late in the afternoon, which may have also been influenced by the breached natural sand barrier that is occurring there. So my laboratory analysis methods consisted of doing 16S sequencing and qPCR to get the DNA from the sediment samples, in which I used DNeasy Power Soil Pro kits for the DNA extraction. I did PCR for amplification and purification before sending my sample pool library to QB3 for sequencing down at UC Berkeley. To collect total nitrogen and carbon to nitrogen ratios, I ground up the sediments to a powder. I weighed out each sample and placed them in foil and sent them to the elemental analyzer. Additional measurements consisted of pH, temperature, percent moisture, microbial biomass, elemental composition, and flux via the incubated resin capsules that I placed. And I also collected nitrate and ammonium concentrations from resin extracts and sediments. Here is a box plot of environmental variables measured, consisting of salinity, total nitrogen, and carbon to nitrogen ratios against each transect subsetted into north and south bounds. Here we can see that the environmental variables within each transect and bound are highly variable. This tells us that the transects are not uniform and should be further evaluated independently. Here we can see I use linear regression graphs, which I calculated in Excel. I obtained the Shannon Diversity Index scores, which look at the alpha diversity of the bacterial communities, and plotted them against all the variables that I collected. And we can see that there's no significant correlation between any of the variables, except with salinity, where there's a slight correlation with lower diversity and increased salinity, which follows pretty much the literature that supports my findings. Here is a non-metric multidimensional scaling plot, or NMDS plot, of rhizospheric sediment samples grouped by transect, and site, and direction. This graph shows the similarity of different points based on closeness. So the closer the point is to another point, the more similar the bacterial community composition was. I obtained a p-value of less than 0.001, showing a significant difference between the north and south bounds, further signaling that the bounds should be looked at independently with bacterial community diversity. Here is a graph showing the relative abundance of phyla in the Aliso Creek estuary bacterial communities. by sampling transect and bounds. Relative abundance gives information on the differences in bacterial community composition. The lower total relative abundance score for the transect 2, second to the left, on the northbound can be attributed to only having obtained 2 samples in this area, whereas the southbound of this transect has a higher relative abundance due to having a duplicate rhizospheric sample in the DNA extraction and sequencing process. This graph gives us insight into the most abundant bacterial communities found in each sample, where looking deeper into the phyla shows us the possible functions they take on in the bacterial community. Here we can see that, I know the text is small, but proteobacteria, bacteriodota, actinobacteria, and acidobacteria made up much of the microbial communities found in each sample transect and bound. This phyla of bacteria play crucial roles in the denitrification pathways for nitrogen removal from the sediment. Smaller portions of the phyla composed in the relative abundance graph, such as Chloroflexi, Planctomycetota, and Verrucomicrobiota, are also found to be involved in the denitrification pathway. These findings can be taken a step further by looking for functional groups in the sequences specifically obtained from each sample, but I was unable to gather this information given the complexity of that and the time frame in which I was given to complete this research. So some significant findings that I found that I will highlight are that salinity has a significant effect on the beta diversity of bacterial communities, but not the alpha diversity. And total nitrogen and carbonation ratios do not have a significant effect on the beta or alpha diversity of the microbial communities, where direction, north versus south, has a significant effect on the bacterial community composition. All right. Now I will be connecting the microbial community diversity to climate change and biodiversity. Microbial communities are essential in keeping the cycling of nutrients in check, which otherwise would wreak havoc on ecosystems. Rising temperatures disrupt microbial communities in the sediment, decreasing microbial diversity and causing important consequences to biodiversity and future climate. Sea level rise can increase salinity stress on estuarine ecosystems, disrupting the functions of microbial communities in their nutrient cycling. Overall, it's great to appreciate everything microorganisms do for us, and in return, we should all do our best to keep waterways, air, soil, and soils clean from toxic pollutants. Right? I wanted to take a moment to say thank you to my lab and my mentor and Spur for funding my research, my friends and my lab group, and thank you to CEMTF for giving me this opportunity to present my research. And that is all.
Wow, that was amazing. It's like I appreciate your education because you educated me just now. And you know, we have to learn from the youth, right? So I'm very, very, very impressed with your presentation, and I hope everybody else is too. Does anybody have any questions for Karis? I think that was great.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of work to collect all that data, but it was definitely paid off in the end, and I'm glad I get to talk about it today. And sorry if the terms weren't very understandable for people that aren't in the sciences, but I'll do my best if anyone has any questions to explain.
Okay, we have one hand up. Full disclosure, that's my husband's hand. So, Robert, you can unmute yourself and ask a quick question, please.
So like, I don't know. I feel like that's really important. I don't know. I just want to add a comment. I feel like kind of like I've always been aware that there's microbacteria, right? So I feel like really good that you said that, because I feel like it's kind of like our lack of awareness and responsibility to not make sure that we don't contaminate the smaller organisms that make up the biosphere, which, like you said, is the largest group, you know what I'm saying, of all, but we don't see them, but they're the biggest.
All right,
Yes.
thank you.
All right, thank you. And I just have a last question though. How does that exactly tie in? Like, so do they like you said, they were sequestering. So what is exactly the function, their interaction between, you know, things?
Well, they have functional genes that allow them to metabolize nutrients such as nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus, which so there's a bunch of different microorganisms with a bunch of different functional genes. And the pathway that I attached, and let me see if I can pull it up, where there was all the equations and stuff. Basically, they are able to do this just like second nature to them. So yeah, they go through all of them, nitrate reductase, and then they'll go into the atmosphere and then cycle back down through nitrogen fixation, ammonification. And yeah, they do some amazing things that I've only focused on the nitrogen cycle, but there's like yeah, they sequester carbon, they can sequester methane and like all these different things, and it's truly amazing what they're capable of doing. But pretty much they just are able to metabolize these nutrients, and then it all goes through a cycle and continuous cycle. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Thank you, Karis, for that. And David has his hand up.
Oh,
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hello, Cheryl, and hello, Karis. Thank you
Hello.
all so much. I'm David Wofford, co-chair of the Rotary Nature Center Friends at Lake Merritt.
Oh,
And among other things, among our work, we teach science and nature there at Lake Merritt, but part of our programming includes what we call plankton pools and the study of microorganisms under the microscopes with our students. And I'm wondering if you might be able to stop by sometime in the future and join us. And as we and our students find these microorganisms under the microscope, might you be able to look at that and say, that one there breaks down nitrogen. That one there addresses phosphorus. It's, that's my general question. And then I'll, through contact, I'll reach out to you. But that's my comment and question.
Well,
thank you for that.
unfortunately, I am in the Southern California area, so I'm nowhere near Lake Merritt, but I think it's really hard to identify them visually. For what I was doing, I extracted the DNA to be able to look at the sequences and then went through all that to be able to tell which phylum were composed in it. And I couldn't do it visually, but I could do DNA extraction and try to look for it. But
Well, no, that's fantastic. And I was just curious, and that makes sense to me when you say that would be the way, DNA extraction. Oh, God bless you for being able to do that. And imagine it takes a tremendous amount of focus and study, and that's something we want to really encourage in our students. So thank you.
yeah, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, Karis. So I guess we'll move on to Leonida, who's here. Yay. And let me just pull up my notes. This has been great so far. I'm so impressed with you, Karis. That's just amazing. So Leonida Andongo, founder of Haiki Nawiri Africa. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I've just shared a presentation that has some photos that will be able to bring the reality of where I come from. And basically, my presentation won't be scientific. It will be community-based and sharing the community experiences, the community realities as far as climate change impacts is concerned, and what we are doing as part of healing the climate and healing the climate crisis. One thing I want to point out is that in 2022, Kenya as a country had the worst drought. We had a lot of pastoralists lose their cattle in thousands. We had people die because of hunger as a result of the drought. And then immediately afterwards, we had the worst floods, and people were dying during this flooding season. People were losing their livestock as well. So we as a country, we've been going through extreme weather events. And the other thing I want to point out is that there are communities in Kenya, for example, which depend on relief food. And sometimes, and this is particularly in semi-arid areas, arid and semi-arid areas, and eastern part of Kenya, as well as the northern part of Kenya towards the border with Somalia. And of course, during extreme climate weather events, what happens is that you don't get to choose the type of food you eat. It doesn't matter whether the food is healthy or not. All you need is to be able to eat food. And then another thing I want to share is as a result of climate crisis, there's a lot of indignity. One classic example is a mother in the coastal region who was boiling stones. She didn't have money, she didn't have food, and she was boiling stones for her children. We all know that if you boil stones, they are not going to cook, but she was just boiling that in order so that the children could see that something is heating up. And this lulled the children to sleep. They slept hungry, but this is one of the saddest stories when we talk about climate change in the Kenyan context. And of course, just to bring to the different elements that are happening in the country, one is that there is push for industrial agriculture in Kenya. We have an economic blueprint called Kenya's Vision 2030, which is pushing for the country to become industrialized. And of course, with the industrialization, there is use of synthetic fertilizers as far as food production is concerned. There's a great push for agribusiness as part of profit making and creating employment for the youth. And I say employment in quotes because with this employability, what is happening is that we are losing our biodiversity, we are using chemicals on our crops, and of course, we are killing bees and other microorganisms that are very beneficial. Our bees are getting eliminated, the butterflies are getting eliminated, and unfortunately, we cannot be able to zone our farms. And so what happens is that when we lose our bees, we cannot be able to, pollination will not be happening. And of course, without pollinators, we will not be having food. And just to share a few of there are different species that have disappeared over time. And when I talk about species, it's not just about food crops, but it's also about fish. For example, what is happening around Lake Victoria is that fish is dying because of pollution of the lake. And the other thing is that because of climate change, the fish are migrating deeper into the lake. And this has implications for the local economies, because one, as fishermen go deeper into the lake, they leave their families. Women, culturally, in communities that do fishing, culture does not allow women to go and fish. It's always presumed that women have moods, they have mood swings, and so they're going to transmit negative energy to the fish. And when they transmit negative energy to the fish tend to disappear. And so women have to depend on the men to go and do the fishing, and then they sell it. And due to climate change, and when the fish go very deep into the lake, the men take too long to come back to the shore with the fish. And women have been forced into transactional sex with men in order to get access to the fish. I don't mean that they don't pay for the fish. They actually pay for the fish, but they have a sexual relationship with the fishermen in order to be assured of the fish stocks. And this particularly happens when there is less fish as a result of climate change. And this has implications, for example, for the health of the women, because we have high levels of HIV infection in beach areas as a result of sexual exchange. When you talk about with climate change, what, for example, pastoralists are doing, they're injecting their cattle in order to produce more milk. And of course, when cattle get injected to hormonal injections, all these chemicals end up in our plates, end up in our tummies when you consume the food. And of course, the push for genetically modified organisms, GM, GM seeds is also something that is happening in the country. And of course, this is all under to address food insecurity as a result of climate crisis. And with this, of course, the biodiversity loss is something that is going to be a reality. And also other things that are impacting on our biodiversity, for example, include desert locusts. We had infestation across the Eastern Africa region, infestation of locusts. And this has relations with climate change because the changes in weather patterns impacted on the breeding patterns of the locusts. And then we had lots of locusts migrating, and where they landed on people's farms. And with the landing on people's farms, what happened is that they really ate a lot of food and vegetation. And of course, there's a lot of hunger in these particular regions. And of course, in the background of all this, we are still yet to come out of the negative impacts of COVID-19. And so, and in the Kenyan situation, for example, I don't know how many of you are seeing the very recent demonstrations that have been happening in the country every Tuesday and Thursday. These demonstrations come about as a result of rising cost of food. The rising cost of food has a relationship with unsustainable debts, but also with the negative impacts of climate change. Because we all know that when in Africa, in Kenya in particular, and in Africa as a continent, we have 330 million smallholder farmers. And all these farmers, majority of them depend on rain-fed agriculture. So it means that when there is no rain, there is no food. And when there is no food, people depend either on government for relief food, or they have to make do with what is available. And for example, in informal settlements, what people are doing to survive, they're pouring more water on their food as soup, and this has nutritional implications as far as the nutrient content of the food that they're eating at any given moment. The other thing that people are doing to survive is that they're skipping meals, and in some instances, children are going to school hungry because of drought. And so what are some of the key things that, for instance, as an organization, as Haki Nawiri Africa, we are working on to address climate crisis? One is we're doing what is called agroecology. Agroecology has the capacity to heal the soil, to heal the land, and to heal humans. Agroecology is a food production process where you produce food, but at the same time you take care of your environment. By taking care of environment, I mean doing things like ensuring that your soil is covered, ensuring that you're aware that soil has life. It's about making contours on your soil to address, to reduce the speed of the wind so that soil erosion does not affect your soil. It's about making terraces. It's about making carbon beds to ensure that water retains moisture so that the soil retains moisture, and at the same time you're able to cover your the crops using mulch. Agroecology is also about planting different crops, so that it's about intercropping and companion cropping, where you plant different crops in such that when in case one crop that fails, you are assured of having some food with the other different crops that are left. And of course, when you plant different crops, of course, elements such as nutritional nutrients in the soil are enhanced. For instance, if you plant leguminous crops, you have a lot of nutrients. And of course, with the intercropping and crop rotation, you're also ensuring that there is an ecosystem balance as far as your food production process is concerned. And the other thing that we all know that women are the majority in Africa. I don't know about the US and other parts of the globe, but in Africa, women are the majority of food producers. So what we do is that we do capacity building. We organize what is called tafakari forums. Tafakari is a Kiswahili word for reflection. And in these tafakari forums, we look at the entire food production process, from soil, seed, care for crops, harvest, and post-harvest. On soil, we conduct what is called basic soil testing. We don't take the soil to the lab. we do basic observation. For example, you ask every farm, we do our trainings in a farmer's homestead, because in such a scenario, you can be able to touch the soil, you can be able to reconnect with nature. And so what happens is that every farmer is expected to bring a glass of soil from their farm. This soil is poured on a piece of white paper. White paper for better visibility in terms of the living organisms. And so the farmers are asked to observe how many earthworms can they count from that one glass of soil. How much green matter do they have? How much brown matter in terms of dry leaves? How much roots can they observe? And when they realize that, of course, there's no earthworms, that's when we have discussions around composting and the importance of making a compost on your farm. And then, of course, we do what is called water retention capacity. This is just pouring some water on the same soil and trying to observe how fast or slowly that water is running off. And of course, if the water runoff is very fast, it means that even the nutrients that are on your soil, whenever it rains, what will happen is that all these nutrients are going to be washed away to the rivers. And then we do what is called a ribbon test, which is a test that looks at the texture of the soil. After this, we train the farmers on composting and the importance of doing compost. We also have discussions around seed sovereignty, particularly indigenous seeds. Not just research, but also realities have convinced us that if you plant indigenous seeds in extreme weather conditions, at least you're going to harvest something, as compared to if you buy your seeds from the aggregate, which are genetically altered. And of course, we also encourage farmers to have what we call seed banks, meaning keeping seeds, not having to go to the aggregate at every planting season, but keeping indigenous seeds within their homestead, so that first, they reduce the footprints to the aggregate. They reduce the use of synthetic fertilizers on their farms by using compost. And of course, in the African continent, food is not just food. We look at the taste of the food. Food has cultural values. Food also has social values. When you're preparing, for example, traditional vegetables, people always come together. That is the space for exchanging the latest news. That is the space for exchanging the latest happenings in the community. For example, who has given birth, who is getting married, and all that. And this is something that is very, genetically modified food is always very mechanical. It's all about making profit and not taking care of the environment. And then we also, when we have discussions around care for crops, that is where we look at what alternatives can we use on our farms so that we don't have to spray with chemicals. And that is why we talk about what are those biological pest control elements that we can use. For example, if you have neem tree on your farm, you can actually crush the barks and the leaves, put it in some water for 1 week, and then filter this water and use it as on your sprinkler and use it as to spray your crops. Planting crops such as lemongrass, which have a pungent smell, which is a repellent, can actually chase away pests. And so these are some of the things that we encourage food producers to use. And we also, in our learning spaces, we ensure that elderly people are present. And this is particularly important for intergenerational learning, because many a times when you talk to people about what used to happen in the past, they say that they might not be convinced. So having elderly people as libraries within our learning spaces becomes very, very important. And of course, the elderly people come with stories. They also come with songs, and this helps to address this negative narrative, particularly about indigenous food. What happens, for instance, with young people, many a times when they're taking lunch and they're eating KFC, they normally take selfies and photos and feel nice about it. But you find that when they're taking indigenous vegetables, nobody wants to be seen. Indigenous vegetables are considered to be a poor man's food. Nobody wants to take any selfies with indigenous food. They call them herbs. But in actual sense, these are not only climate resilient. For example, if you talk about pearl millet, you talk about sorghum, you talk about cassava, they not only have they're not only climate resilient, but they also have nutritional and medicinal value. Lastly, to bridge the intergenerational gap as far as biodiversity is concerned through agroecology, we're working with schools, and the main aim of the schools, working with schools, is to regreen the schools through tree planting, but also developing what you call food forest. And food forest is having gardens within the school setting that have vegetables, that also have fruits, and in all this, biodiversity is enhanced. And we're also promoting something called Adopt a Tree, where each child plants a tree and takes care of that tree. So with agroecology, you're also building responsibility amongst the young people, in as much as you're also regreening the schools and changing the biodiversity of those schools. Some of the positives of our community engagement, particularly with agroecology, one is that schools are having their own vegetables, they don't have to buy. The children are able to consume healthy food. Schools are becoming spaces, spaces where people can come and learn, parents can come and learn from the school, and the children can become conduits of information back home to their parents. It's also teaching children to become more responsible. And of course, it has, through this has enabled us have more visibility as far as the organization is concerned, and you're having more learning institutions coming to us to learn about agroecology from us. Perhaps, Cheryl, if you could share the presentation so that some of the photos can be seen by the participants, by the attendees, kindly. Basically, the photos, what is being shown in the photos, the presentation that Cheryl is going to share after this, is agroecology in practice, where, like, for example, when you go to farmers, we acknowledge the fact that they're using chemicals, and we don't demonize, because when you go to communities and you start demonizing what they're doing, the tendency to accept change becomes limited. And so we acknowledge what they're doing, and so we try to share with them the alternative way. And how we do this is that we ask the farmers, first of all, to set aside a small portion of their land, and whatever we learn in the tafakari sessions, they go and practice it on their farm. Like, for example, if you had a discussion on soil testing, we ask them to go and test their soil. If we've had a discussion on seed banks, we ask them to go and set up seed banks in their communities. And with time, we are getting positive changes from the farmers, because they are saying that they're becoming champions in the community in terms of becoming agroecology champions, and sharing with fellow farmers about agroecology and the relevance of agroecology, and why agroecology is can actually heal the soil, can actually heal the environment, and also bring back biodiversity. And of course, with planting different crops, we automatically bring back biodiversity. With respect to traditional knowledge, and working with indigenous communities is also about bringing back biodiversity through knowledge sharing and co-creation of knowledge. Perhaps you can just flip through the different photos. What you're seeing there is Machakos County. Machakos is a semi-arid region, and that is also Machakos County, where we had floods. The most recent floods really clearing, damaging crops that were still on the farm. And of course, with this, agrochemical companies are coming with false solutions to address climate change. And part of it is they're coming with chemicals. They're talking to us about fast growing crops. And of course, when you go to the agrovet, they'll always sell you a package. They'll sell you the seeds, and they'll sell you the chemicals accompanied with the seeds. And that's why we are coming up with agroecology as part of the solution. And we are targeting not women, but also men, because Africa, and Kenya in particular, is a patriarchal country. And so when you're having these discussion sessions, you're also promoting equity as far as food production is concerned. And we all know that when you talk about climate change, negative impacts of climate change, women and girls tend to be, in my part of the world, women and girls tend to be more impacted on by climate crisis because one, they are more closer to nature in terms of care roles. For example, cooking, they have to walk longer distances in search of food. They are also subjected to gender-based violence when they go to search for natural resources, for example, water and firewood. And sometimes they get, when they go to get water and they stay for too long at the well because there's a queue, because there's less water. When they come back home, they are often beaten up because they are told that they're being unfaithful. Those are some of the photos in communities where we are doing practicals, that is making a carbon bed where you dig a hole, put different organic matter, and then cover the soil, and then at last what you do is you put mulch and plant on top of the mulch, and this is all aimed at water retention and is part of agroecology, particularly in semi-arid areas, because when it rains, this water can be retained on that soil for a much longer period. We are also working with university students as part of changing the narrative. And this is through taking them to rural communities where they are able to learn about the struggles of food producing communities and the negative impacts of climate change. And all this is aimed at changing the mindset of communities. With that, I'd like to come to the end of my presentation. Thank you for this opportunity. And open to questions. In case there are any questions, I can respond to them.
Thank you so much, Leonida. That I learned so much. I was taking notes. I mean, it's just incredible to hear like the GMOs, you know, that's terrible. And to hear of the sexual violence that goes on is surprising. And I look forward to the day when I can come to Kenya and meet yourself and be on the motherland. I'm just shocked from what you said, some of the things that you said. But what's so beautiful though is the multi-generational, the elders teaching the youth, and your work to change what's happening and to provide good food and good farming for the biodiversity and the community. And your work sounds so important. And I was introduced to you on A Rude Awakening show here on KPFA with our friend Sabrina Jacobs, and I was like, wow, I wanted to hear more, and we need to hear more from you and what goes on in other parts of the world. So thank you so much for your presentation. Does anybody have any questions? I don't see any hands raised. So thank you so much. I guess nobody has any questions. Do you see any hands raised, Jack? Oh, Robert, my husband has a question.
If I could just echo, though, what you said, Cheryl, I am totally blown away by your presentation, Leonida. I took a whole bunch of pages of notes, and just everything you said was so rich and powerful. It's just totally wonderful. Thank you so much. But Robert, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, no, my question refers to like when you made the comment on the young people, how they're kind of, I guess it sounds to me like they've been culturally genocided because they don't like their own culture, so they want to go to the mono culture that's been created, that's kind of like a false culture. So how do you guys how do you address that? I mean, what's your strategy?
Okay, thank you for the question. What we do is, first of all, there are some young people who are very much dissociated from the rural areas because of urbanization and, of course, They don't have, some of them do not have roots with their rural communities. Perhaps their parents migrated into the cities and they no longer go back to the rural communities. And so what we are doing as an organization is to create that space where young people can be able to interact with the elderly. And this is through learning and exchange, where we take young people, we deliberately take young people to rural areas so that they can get to understand the struggles of food producers. They can get to listen to the stories of the elderly. They can get to listen to the past. And we also organize what we call food festivals, because in Kenya we have 43 plus distinct ethnic communities, and each community has its own culture. They have their own food, and so what we do is that in these food festivals, food is prepared. The different indigenous food are prepared, and then there's an explanation on how the different food are prepared from the first step to the last step. And then you also, the participants also get to taste the different food. And of course, when the food is being eaten, also what happens is that there's a sharing of the medicinal value and the nutritional, the medicinal, the cultural, and the nutritional value of those different food. What I can attest as from being an African and still in the African continent, what helped us, particularly during the onset of COVID, was the food that we eat. As countries were grappling with the negative impacts of COVID in terms of the death calamities and all, what helped us as Africans in terms of was in terms of the food that we eat and the nutritional content of the natural food that we have. And so this is also part of the conversations that we normally have with many young people, because there are people who are using like lemons and getting healed. You know, people are just sharing that, yes, I just coughed and I got well. And so for us, we believe that food is medicinal, and food can protect us from emergency, any upcoming pandemics or emergencies. And that's why, as an organization, we're looking at food. We really value the cultural aspect of food. We've had the first festival in eastern part of Kenya with a community called the Kamba, which is a Bantu community. We'll be having another food festival in the Lake region, where the food eaten is predominantly, it's a fisherfolk community, but they have a lot of indigenous vegetables that they use. And you also, of course, we will also be bringing on board elders, even in the school spaces as part of intergenerational learning. Thank you.
It's so important to understand the medicinal value of food as well. I mean, a lot of people aren't really aware. I know, like recently I learned, like willow trees, you can make a tea from the leaves that works with inflammation, brings down inflammation. I know that also is true for like comfrey root and aloe vera. Like there's all these different remedies that people don't talk about. So I think it's amazing and wonderful and beautiful that that's part of your teachings, to understand the whole plant and how it manifests in our lives and can help us in so many ways. So thank you so much, Leonida. Especially, I know you were having issues trying to connect, but we connected, and we started at a different time, and you were able to accommodate that too. So I appreciate you and appreciate all the work that you do. And I honestly hope and pray that one day I'll be able to see you face to face in your homeland. I remember when I was on Berkeley City Council, a contingent of African mayors and councils, members from all across Africa. I sat at the table with like 15 beautiful Africans, like elected officials. And I was just like, it's giving me chills just saying it, because that's the closest people are the closest I get to Africa. And I got a hug from them, and they were from South Africa actually. And it was just a beautiful moment for me. And I look forward to that moment again, to be on that's my dream before I move on to the other world, is to go to Africa. So thank you. You brought some to Africa here today. And some amazing, truly wonderful information for all of us to ponder. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
I'm
And
seeing
does
a
anybody
question
else?
of, yeah, I'm seeing a question on indigenous vegetables. Yeah, maybe I can respond if time allows. Can I?
Yes, go.
Okay. Some of the indigenous vegetables that we have are amaranthus. That is one of them. We also have pigweed. We also have cowpeas. It's quite rhetoric that the names are a bit derogatory in terms of, pigweed and chicken, chicken peas and cowpeas and all that. And this was something I can say that this is something that was very deliberate by the colonialists, in that it made us to shift from, first of all, producing our food and also looking at our food negatively as African people. And when we have these food festivals and we have these seed banks, we're also trying to change the narrative about the negativity of African indigenous food. Yeah, thank you. The other one is called the African nightshade. That is also another indigenous vegetable. Yeah. When you come to visit, you'll find all this. I'm actually trying to put up a farm that has all this. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. The other thing, my daughter, she has a friend, I forget where they're from in Africa, but they got COVID. And my daughter's friend's husband, I think he's from Ghana, I'm not sure, but anyway, his dad brought over some herbs, and some of them were things that, my daughter sent me the text, and I was like, well, what's that? And she's like, I don't know, it's an African herb. And then she told me, and I don't remember what it is, but literally they said, like, they were pretty sick with COVID, and after he brought over the medicine that he made, they felt better. Even the baby had COVID, the baby felt better, everybody felt better. So yeah, we need to understand holistically all the components of the plants, because there is a secret life of plants that we need to understand. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right. So next we have, I believe, Liz Chamberlain, from the grassroots to the global biodiversity conservation beyond protected area acres. I can't read, haven't had enough coffee. Thank you, Liz. She's the Director of Innovation at Point Blue. You can take it away. Thank you for being here.
Sure. I'm just going to take a moment and see if I can do the part that's always most exciting, which is to share my screen. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Liz Chamberlain. I'm with Point Blue Conservation Science, where I'm Director of Innovation. I've been with the organization for about 6 years. It's my first foray with Point Blue, working with nonprofits. I came from academia and other industries, so it's been a great learning curve. I'll say my background is as an ecologist, but at Point Blue, I wear a very different type of hat. I think as a generalist, and I help work across all of our programs and connect our work to impact externally. So I've been diving into all kinds of things, including policy engagement. And I just want to take a moment to appreciate being invited to speak here today. It's been great to have this opportunity to learn from the other panelists already. And it's super inspiring to me, especially Leonida, to hear your presentation and be able to learn about what you're doing. And some of what I'm talking about today will be sort of Point Blue's version of that in terms of how we think about agroecology and using schools as learning spaces. So I'll talk more about that. The title of my talk is From the Grassroots to the Global Biodiversity Conservation Beyond Protected Areas. All right, so Point Blue was established in 1965. Our origin was as a Point Reyes Bird Observatory, so a collection of ornithologists observing birds. So biodiversity is at the heart of what we do. We have since expanded our scope considerably. We've got about 160 staff. We're headquartered now in the North Bay area. I'm in Petaluma, where headquarters is. Our mission is to conserve ecosystems through science, partnership, and outreach. And increasingly, we're taking local to a hemispheric approach. So that's sort of inherent in the title of my talk. We work both on the ground, and we also think about how to connect our impact to broader efforts. We've always taken a climate smart approach, so I'll talk about that today as well, which specifically thinks about addressing both current conditions and thinking about how you can plan for what's going to be changing under climate change. So it's really thinking about dynamic action to approach how do we address environmental threats, including climate change, how do we protect biodiversity, how do we help communities be resilient under all of the different threats that we're facing, and how do we incorporate humans into that, into human needs into what we're doing with biodiversity conservation. So, we're a science-based organization. And so as a collection of scientists, we tend to create a lot of things like frameworks, principles, and tools to help us systematically approach problems like biodiversity conservation, climate change, and all other problems that we're all interested in here today. And so I'll just kind of outline quickly what we mean in this context. So a climate smart principle or a climate smart framework does things like when you're looking at an environmental problem or a conservation problem, you focus not only on what's happening right now, but you think about future conditions and you try to plan for change. Nature, ecosystems, nothing stays the same. And we have to think about how can we promote resilient health for wildlife, for people, for microbial communities, for all of us, given the specter of constant change. We think about designing actions and ecosystem context. So we don't just want to focus on one site when we're thinking of a climate smart approach. We think about a watershed approach. What's happening right here is going to be affected by, or right here in the Petaluma Valley will be affected by what's happening upstream of us, for example. We always like to take an adaptive management approach, which means we're trying to always collect information and collect data and learn from whatever we're doing. We might pick a solution, but then we collect data on that solution, that action that we're taking, and we collect data so that we can learn how well it's working and improve our impact going forward. We want to prioritize action, so that's really important. I think when in a lot of cases when we're looking at a conservation solution, it's tempting because of the urgency involved and so many of the problems we're facing today to rush to action. But we want to make sure we're stopping to set goals and so that we can know if we're being effective. Increasingly, I think Point Blue is focusing on this next one, which is collaborating and communicating across sectors. And I think this is what makes our organization somewhat unique in the conservation space, in that we have a unique ability to help connect communities that otherwise don't always talk to each other. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. But we work both on the ground with farmers and ranchers, other nonprofits, local counties and government entities. And so we're really working in that grassroots sense. We have staff that are distributed across the state that live and are very much immersed in the communities where they work, statewide and beyond. But we also work at a different scale with state and federal and beyond agency decision makers. And those two communities don't often directly intersect. So one of the things that we can try to do is help connect those communities so that the conversations happening on the ground end up influencing the conversations that are happening at the decision-making level. And of course, we also like to think about practicing the 10% rule. And in the Climate Smart framework, that really means being willing to experiment. And this can be really hard for scientists and maybe for everyone, in that you have to be willing to try things out, which means you might fail at times. And so, but important, of course, failure is critical for learning. All right, I want to just back up a second and talk a little bit about sort of the origins of conservation. And many of you are probably aware, but conservation really started as limited almost entirely to the concept of protection. So things like protecting places from people, protecting nature is how we do biodiversity conservation. We know that was kind of foundational to the origin of things like our national parks, which are places where we are conserving nature, things like Yosemite that you see here. But we did that, of course, by removing the people from the environment, the indigenous peoples that had been living on that land, living with that land, and stewarding that land for thousands and thousands of years. And so protection remains at the heart of a lot of our conservation sort of initiatives and philosophies today. A big one that you may have heard about is 30 by 30, which happens across multiple scales around the globe today, this concept of 30 by 30, where it literally means to conserve 30%. So it's, again, protection of land and coastal waters by the year 2030. So it's a great goal. I think it's a great gateway drug for people, I like to call it, into the idea of conservation and thinking about biodiversity conservation. It's a concept that really pulls people in, but it's still rooted in most concepts of 30 by 30 in protection, which doesn't incorporate people. Similarly, at the national scale, we have the America the Beautiful Act, which is very much in line with 30 by 30. But I think that what we're thinking about increasingly is that beyond the social and the social injustices and the things that the negative impacts on people from just focusing on protection, removing people from the land, not only disconnect from nature, but also direct injustices to people removed. The concept of protection can be problematic because by itself, it's not clear that it's working. There's been a 5-fold increase in public spending on conservation globally over the past several decades. And at the same time, we've still seen up to a 68% decline in species, so biodiversity loss. And so really famously, many of us might be familiar with, especially in our world, a paper that came out a couple of years ago saying that we've lost nearly 2.9 billion birds in the past couple of decades. And we're seeing those trends, as we know, with the biodiversity loss crisis globally. So we need to innovate our conception of conservation, and we need to reimagine the role of human-dominated landscapes and human people in our concepts of conservation. Now, California, I talked about 30 by 30, and California has been an early innovator in this concept. The state has adopted the Pathways to 30 by 30 strategy. It has a lot of intentionality that's gone into it. It was a very collaborative process. Secretary Wade Crowfoot, who is Secretary of Natural Resources for the California Natural Resources Agency, has called 30 by 30, more than a policy, more than an initiative in California. He calls it a movement, and it really has been built in that way, bringing in nonprofits and RCDs and soliciting input and incorporating that input into how the state conceives of its 30 by 30 efforts. Its 3 overarching goals for state 30 by 30 efforts are to protect and restore biodiversity, expand access to nature, and mitigate and build resilience to climate change. And what California has done, I think that's been, helped elevate our position as leaders in this 30 by 30 concept, is California has already really expanded its concept of 30 by 30 beyond protection. Protection can be important, can be a great tool in a conservation toolbox, but we're thinking beyond that and putting significant resources behind it. So I wanted to touch quickly today on 2 programs my organization and I'm involved with that are funded by 30 by 30 state surplus funds. They're funds intended for 30 by 30, but neither is about protection or acquisitions. These programs are about bolstering biodiversity, bolstering climate resilience, and helping to improve equity in conservation and with 30 by 30 funds, sorry. And so one of these programs is one that I co-lead. It's the Roots program. It's funded with a $26 million block grant from the California Wildlife Conservation Board, which is the main funder for California's 30 by 30 efforts. And what 30 by 30 has done within California is implement beyond protection, beyond counting acres conserved, is to build in stewardship, and restoration. And particularly one of the ways the strategy does that explicitly is through Pathway 9. And this acronym OECM, this stands for Other Effective Conservation Measures. It's a strange term in my view, but what it really means is restoration actions, stewardship actions, actions on the land done by people that can help us improve habitat for wildlife and also resilience for people. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Within our Roots program, our goal is to help distribute these funds across the state and for wildlife beneficial projects on farms and ranches. So these are non-protected lands, working landscapes across the state, grazed lands, working farming operations. So we work with farmers and ranchers across the state. And we help them. I'm a metaphorical thinker, so I like to think that we help pull ideas from out of the sky, like from the dream stage, and literally plant them in the ground. So our staff provide technical assistance. They go out and they work with farmers and ranchers and tribal partners, city governments, all kinds of other entities. They walk the land, they look at what the goals are for the farmer or rancher or the other applicants, and we think about the goals of our program, and we put those things together, design projects, get them through all of the state requirements that there are with doing restoration in California, and we end up planting in the ground. And I wanted to say here that another important piece of the Roots program is that we lean heavily on our long history, over 30 years of doing community-centered restoration, often with K through 12 students. So we bring students out and teachers and other community members to actually conduct the restoration on the ground with us. And we, as Leonida talked about in her presentation, we see schools as really important places for information sharing, not only building buy-in for the importance of this work, helping connect students to the land, helping build our future conservation stewards, but then also empowering those children to plant the plants that will grow into wildlife habitat in their own communities. So I think it's really important that we think of the way our Roots program functions as the community members, and the buy-in that we build or support is as important as the trees that we plant or the hedgerows that we plant or the beaver dam analogs that we build in streams. So right now we're working on full bore ahead on about 59 projects in 25 counties across California. 86% of the applicants we work with self-identified as historically underserved. And that's really important because we really wanted to help get these publicly funded conservation resources into the hands of people who have traditionally had trouble accessing these types of funds because of all the barriers that go along with it. We're right now planting about 200 practices across the state. Next up for our Roots program, so we're still going full speed ahead on implementation of those 60 projects. We're continuing to outreach about the program. We're working on a new round of project development with new applicants over the next couple of years. And we just hired our first social scientists to bring on board at Point Blue to work with all of our ecologists and restoration practitioners and working land specialists to help think about how we can analyze what we're doing from a social science standpoint and hopefully continue to improve access to these types of programs and communicate our results back to the state as well. Just a little bit of information there about how you can connect with us if you're interested. And I'll just quickly talk about a second similar program we're leading at Point Blue, also a year old, and also funded with state 30 by 30 funds, but focused on restoration and stewardship. The program I'm going to talk about here is really similar, but to the Roots program that I just discussed, but it is focused on high elevation wet meadows. So these are critical headwater systems for water in California. Mountain meadows compose less than 2% of our Sierra Cascade region. They're biodiversity hotspots, even though they're geographically small in scope. They perform all kinds of functions and ecosystem services for us, including storing and purifying water, sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, and of course, they are culturally significant to many of our tribal partners. And yet, over half of them are degraded and in need of restoration. And so that's where we are again partnering with the California Wildlife Conservation Board through a $24 million block grant that we are again re-granting out to entities to do mountain meadow restoration projects. And right now, a year into the program, we're already working in more than 17 watersheds that composes 20 counties across California. And there's about 4,000 acres of meadow restoration implementation underway, with additional acres under planning for restoration in the future. At the same time, we're also doing lots of science and monitoring on these projects. Again, thinking about that adaptive management framework to ensure that we are achieving the goals we're setting out to achieve, and that we can, if not, shift gears and improve what we're doing. And I talked about moving from the grassroots to the global. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I'm taking everything that I'm learning here on the ground through these types of programs, the Roots program and the Sierra Meadows program, and translating or transferring those lessons learned to sort of broader initiatives, decision-making, conversations, and collectives. So I'm on the steering committee of what we call the California Global Biodiversity Working Group, which is a coalition led by nonprofits that has helped build a California coalition that includes our Natural Resources Agency leadership participate in this coalition. At least 7 state elected officials participated with us last time, and we expect them to again. And we take our California coalition and we participate in the global conversation with the UN Convention for Biological Diversity, which is sort of a companion entity to what we're all familiar with, the climate COPs, which is the Paris Agreement. Many of us are familiar with what happens at the UN Climate COP. There's also the UN Biodiversity COP. COP 15 in Montreal a couple of years ago, this was our delegation to that. And what came out of COP 15 was the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Agreement. And so we participated there during the production of that agreement. I think we're going to see a video on that a little bit later today. But essentially, the Global Biodiversity Framework is a critically important global document that helps lay out a plan to address global biodiversity loss. And it's layered. Here's this, I like this figure. There's a lot on here. It's not really as complicated as it looks. But what it really shows is how the Global Biodiversity Framework, which consists of 4 goals and 23 targets, connects to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And the layers that you see here just organize the biodiversity targets. And so at the bottom, there's environment. The next layer up in these rings is economy. The third layer is society, and the fourth layer is means of implementation. So for all of these layers, there's targets meant to help nations address global biodiversity loss. And I want to say here that our California delegation participation in the global biodiversity conferences, the next one's coming up this fall. We're preparing for it now in Cali, Colombia. Is so important because the US as a nation is not party to the Convention on Biological Diversity, all kinds of political reasons. And that makes the participation of subnational governments, like state governments, like California state government. We have cities participating with us. So important. So more of the regional and local scale government is so important in the participation because the US is not party to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So as we head into COP 16 in Cali, Colombia, this COP is focused on supporting countries in mobilizing national action around the global biodiversity framework and helping prevent and address biodiversity loss, which of course is linked to all the other things we've heard talked about today, food production, climate resilience, and it's beyond just biodiversity itself. And then mobilizing implementation of actions to address biodiversity loss. And really importantly, just like we're doing today, sharing benefits, sharing knowledge, providing an opportunity to discuss and collaborate. Our coalition is focused on helping California track progress towards what it's doing around the global biodiversity framework. And while California is really focused on 30 by 30, which is incorporated into 3 of the targets of the global biodiversity framework, we're trying to help the state see they're already doing a lot more. They're doing more than just protection and investing in restoration and stewardship and equity and climate resilience, as I touched on briefly with just some of the examples through the programs that we're working towards. Our working group for this global effort is an inclusive, scalable model. Anyone who's interested is welcome to join. And yes, with that, I think I'll conclude my presentation.
Thank you so much, Liz. Again, I've learned so much, and I need to get out your pictures were so beautiful. Um,
Happy
does
to share.
anybody have any questions? I don't know who just said that, but um, if not, we'll just move on. And thank you, Liz. That was great. That was very, very good. And I appreciate you being here and taking the time. And Point Blue, I gotta go there. Yes, thank you. Next up, we have Connected California, helping people and wildlife coexist and thrive. We're going to hear from Neil Sharma, Senior Manager, California Wildlife Program and Wildlife Conservation Network. So thank you, Neil, for being here. I know you're a little under the weather, but we appreciate that you took the time to be here with us this morning.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Yes, COVID, no joke. My second time around having it, not as intense as the first time, but definitely has me down. I wasn't gonna say anything, and I was gonna see if I could pull it off, but here we go. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up some visuals here. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the invitation and the intersectional premise of the event. I think it's a daily occurrence that I'm having a conversation with somebody about how intertwined biodiversity, ecosystem function, and climate resilience really are. So just appreciate you putting on the series and for the invitation. And also shout out to Liz Chamberlain for some great context on conservation in California, which helps set the stage. So my name is Neil Sharma. I'm with the Wildlife Conservation Network. We're a nonprofit based in San Francisco, although I'm in San Jose, and we have conservation programs all around the world. Most of what I'm going to be talking about today is our work in California to conserve ecological connectivity, but I'll just first start by setting the stage a bit about the organization more broadly. So WCN, really our role is to provide financial and technical support to a network of locally led field-based conservationists around the world. And so the piece there I would underscore is really the network aspect. And so we're a group of people who are working together to protect wildlife. It's really about working with people and wildlife. And so really thinking about the work intersectionally as far as what the challenges are people are experiencing, how they're contributing to conditions on the ground, and what kind of interventions need to be brought to bear. And so the idea behind the network is really that our impact can be greater than the sum of its parts. And so we're a relatively small organization, but we have a relatively large network of folks that we work with. And we organize our work around three key strategies or different ways we work. We have a partner network, and so these are independent standalone organizations in different parts of the world that we help fundraise for or provide various kinds of capacity building based on their needs. We have a Rising Wildlife Leaders program where we're really helping early and mid-career conservation professionals and also providing some scholarships for people in their academic education. And then we have our wildlife funds, which are essentially strategic grant-making outfits where we raise funds and we deploy those towards a particular conservation issue or challenge. In the 20-some years that WCN's been around, we now have involvement going in every continent at this point, and we're continuing to further develop our network. In addition to the conservation practitioners, an equally integral part of our community is the supporters. And so, the impact that we're able to collectively have is largely credited to people's faith in WCN. So before we get to the California work, I just want to highlight an example of one of our partners' work. This will take us down to Colombia just for a little bit, and this animal is it's a small primate known as the cotton-top tamarin, which is threatened primarily by habitat loss and fragmentation, and also illegal wildlife trade, unfortunately around pet trade issues. And I'm really going to focus on the work of this organization called Proyecto TT, who are a great partner of ours, and highlighting some of their work on habitat conservation. And so this is an example of the habitat where the cotton-top tamarin lives. They've been working to, in some cases, acquire or otherwise designate areas of the forest permanently protected for conservation for the cotton-top to make its living. And this is a view of part of a network of protected areas they're working to establish over a multi-year time frame. So it's in that protected areas aspect of conservation that Liz was just talking about previously. This is an example of how they're working on that approach down in Colombia. They're also working on reforestation in areas that have been impacted. And so they have staff, but they're also working with community members to propagate native plants and then actually get those in place as part of native forest reforestation. And they're doing this on the scale of thousands of acres. And part of their 5 to 10 year ambition, we see highlighted here, is to ultimately connect protected areas, working in many cases with farmers, where they're able to reach conservation agreements, where their organization is able to provide equipment or trainings or other resources that the farmers need to make their livelihoods, in exchange for setting aside some areas and in some cases reforesting those areas to provide this broader habitat connectivity that's going to be important for the long-term health of the species and many others that share this place. So really a community-centered approach to conservation that's meeting the conservation need that's particularly acutely affecting some of these species, while also engaging with other challenges people are facing as part of the solution. So we have partners like that all around the world, but I don't want to waste any time to bring us back here to California, which is where I'm born and raised, and this is where I spend all my time working. And so here we're greeted to set the stage by a beautiful puma looking back at us. So this is the puma, the mountain lion, the cougar. These are different names for the same animal. This is one of our many neighbors that we share this wonderful state with. WCN's work in California, I would describe as a hub within a community of conservationists who are working to conserve connectivity throughout the state. And so before I go further, just so you know, we're working with a similar vocabulary. Connectivity in this standpoint, we're really talking about the conditions in the landscape that support life in its broadest sense. And so we think about different needs of an animal here, like this species of newt, which needs to move seasonally, sometimes crossing roads to its peril, as part of an annual breeding migration. But there's a connectivity aspect there. It needs certain habitat conditions. It needs to be able to find those, and it needs to be able to carry out its life cycle. On a much different scale, we have we come back to the puma, which covers easily 100 miles in its day-to-day behaviors. And so we think about the state of California starts to feel fairly small when we think about the home range of a puma. And really all species need some level of connectivity to live their lives. Connectivity is essential for these ecological relationships and processes to carry out. And from a climate resilience standpoint, we know it's really important for adaptation, where the plant communities that occur in one part of the state today may well not be there in the future. And we know there are a lot of changes that are to be expected, and providing connectivity is a way to allow these different life forms and ecosystem processes to carry out as they need. And so this species right here is a cause for, you know, what this species is experiencing is really causing some urgent concern around connectivity in California, really because of how certain subpopulations are experiencing the effects of habitat fragmentation. So fragmentation essentially being the inverse of connectivity. So what happens when habitat gets cut up into isolated pieces, whether it's by a highway or converted to some other use? Then we start to see problems for biodiversity persistence and the overall health of our ecosystems. And I think Tiffany Yap, who's after me, is maybe going to go a bit deeper into this, but Tiffany, no pressure if you're not going to. I do want to touch briefly on what we're seeing on the map here. And so these different colors relate essentially to different populations of puma. So we have the Bay Area right here. And so especially the coastal populations are effectively isolated, where these populations aren't able to interbreed with each other, exchange genetic information. We know genetic diversity is important for the health and viability of a species. And we're starting to see some of the signs of inbreeding. And so we know that's a problem. If we lose this top predator in these ecosystems, we start to see cascading negative effects downwards. So we know it's an important problem to solve. We need to restore connectivity for these populations of pumas, but that's really as an indicator of a much broader issue that we need to solve throughout California, which is make sure there's enough connectivity between these habitats. So one of the main areas of intervention is focused on linear infrastructure like the highway system. So what we see here is a wildlife crossing that was built under Highway 17 in Santa Cruz County. And so what I'm going to do here is just highlight some of the really exciting, great work being done in the Bay Area, particularly the peninsula and the South Bay, to really stitch these systems back together with attention to fixes such as this wildlife crossing structure. So this was great work led by the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County and Caltrans, where they came together to, over a period of 10 years, understand the wildlife data, figure out where this needed to be built, and go through the process to conserve property and eventually get this constructed. And so these are really important features in order to provide safe passage for wildlife, so they're not getting hit and killed on the roads, so they can continue to live their lives and contribute to healthy ecosystems. They also have a public safety element oftentimes, where animals not being hit on roads is also safer for drivers and the traveling public. So there's a good body of information about how effective these kinds of structures are once they're put in place. And we're seeing a lot of energy and momentum in California to figure out where these need to go and get them in there. So this is the location of that work out Santa Cruz County on Highway 17. This is the first documented mountain lion using that structure after it was constructed. So, you know, it very much is an if you build it, they will come sort of situation. There's another similar project happening. It's a few years out in Santa Clara County by the Lexington Reservoir. There's another effort just south of San Jose, between San Jose and Morgan Hill, in a place called Coyote Valley. And so there, the partners, notably the Peninsula Open Space Trust and Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, have been working to acquire property for conservation and plan for the future of those properties, which is in many cases involves some large-scale habitat restoration. And then in this complex type of setting, there are multiple roadway corridors that also need similar wildlife crossing infrastructure. And so there's work underway to plan those and get those built in the years to come. Further to the southeast, on Highway 152 in Pacheco Pass, there's some great work happening out there. And hopefully you're starting to see the theme where different projects in different places are interrelated. So if we need to make sure that the mountain lions, for example, in the Santa Cruz Mountains are able to exchange genes and travel back and forth between the Diablo Range or further south, they'll need all these interventions in place, and they all take a heavy lift to get them there. So it's a really beautiful example of collaboration and complementarity within a region. So the work out in Pacheco Pass in the Diablos, there's a partnership working out there to acquire property such as this one for wildlife habitat, and also study the highway. So this is from the Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency, who's leading the charge out there. And this will be a similar effort. It starts by studying wildlife, seeing how they're interacting with the roads, where are the problem areas where they're being hit, where are they not even able to approach, and figuring out what kind of engineered solutions can be put in place to keep them off the road and guide them to safe passage. The last example in this part of the state is down here between the Santa Cruz Mountains and the Gavilan Range, so south of Gilroy, inland from Monterey Bay. There's a really great effort that's been ramping up over the past few years. Similar flavor of work. I just want to zoom in closer to this landscape to highlight some of the complexity in there. So you can see a highway coming through the landscape. That's Highway 101. There are other highways as well. And so many of those will need similar wildlife crossing infrastructure. And some of that work is already underway to plan crossings in this section, which is the deadliest for wildlife as it's currently understood. But part of the work that's happening right now is to get together with the different agencies, nonprofit colleagues, learn from community members, because this is also a landscape that has residences throughout. And so we really need a comprehensive conservation strategy here that works with the community to figure out how to alleviate some of the issues on the roadways for wildlife, but also make it an appropriate conditions in the ground where people aren't having conflicts with wildlife that they can't navigate, and that the habitat conditions really allow wildlife to persist in the landscape, move between those mountain ranges, and continue contributing to a healthy ecosystem. And so a lot of the work right now is figuring out which specific actions need to be taken out where in the landscape, which habitats need restoration, where the problem areas are on the highway. And so it's really emblematic of the kind of multi-agency, multi-nonprofit efforts that it takes to kind of move these kinds of efforts from the ideas stage to the implementation stage. So throughout California, there's similar work really centered around highway crossing infrastructure that's really moving into an exciting era. You know, this from, it's a different conversation now than it was even 5 years ago, as far as the amount of momentum on this issue and the changes we're starting to see. And it's really encouraging. And it's not happening by accident. It's a lot of credit to a lot of people. So this is a map that is an inventory of wildlife crossings that was developed by our partners at the Wildlands Network, where just to walk through it briefly, the green icons correspond with completed crossing structures like that one that I showed in Santa Cruz County on Highway 17. Yellow are in planning, yellow are in construction, and red are in planning. And so what I would highlight here is there's a lot of work that is being done and continues to need to be done when you think about the extent of the state highway system alone, let alone other infrastructure in California. And we're learning a lot about how issues that folks didn't know about when this infrastructure was being put in. We're learning how to remediate those issues now that we do know what we know now, and also figuring out how to think differently about this type of infrastructure moving into the future, as far as how to plan differently, how to avoid impacts, and if they can't be avoided in the first place, how to minimize and mitigate for those impacts. So it's a really exciting era for wildlife crossings in California, throughout the US. We have a long way to go, but we have better momentum than ever. Before I wrap up, the other piece I want to touch on is really a conversation about land use. And I think this photo really does a striking job of sort of setting the premise there, where for due reasons, a lot of attention is happening around wildlife crossing infrastructure on highways. But when we think about the big picture, the long term, those kinds of fixes will only be effective if we're able to conserve habitat at scale throughout California. And that immediately puts us into a really intersecting conversation about land use, housing, energy, conservation, climate resilience. And it's an exciting time from my perspective to really think about increasingly cross-sectoral conversations about these challenges. And raise new ideas, looking for common ground to figure out how we can respond, we as a society collectively can respond to some of these challenges that ultimately affect land use decisions and our long-term health in California. And so that's an equally vital and important part of the work that fits into sort of the big picture that we're trying to work towards collectively here. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up there, and thank you again for the invitation to join you today.
Thank you, Neil. That was amazing. The wildlife pictures were so beautiful too. Yeah, I wish I could see those pictures in person, but I mean, see those animals in person, but I'd probably be scared to death, but I would love to see them. But anyway, I have a question because it's been a while, but like probably like 5 years ago, 3 years ago, when I went to New York, we were driving on the New York State Thruway, and you're talking about highway crossings and remediating issues for the wildlife. But all along the freeway, all along the New York State Thruway, were deers that had gotten hit. I mean, literally, it's like every like 100 feet or so, there were like two or three. I mean, it was I'm from New York and had driven that highway, most of my, from life until 25. Never have I seen that on any of the highways, like the Taconic Parkway or the Thruway or any of those back roads. So I was just curious, like, are they doing something about that on the East Coast? Because that would, as a driver, just, trying to get to my destination, it was really, and I love deer too. So it was really hard for me to handle that. So I was just curious.
Yeah, so that specific part of the East Coast, I'm not sure, but there is definitely, very comparable work happening. And I think it's often the larger bodied animals which get urgent attention because of the driver safety aspect. I'm not saying that's the way it should be. I think, we should have attention to these issues no matter what species they're impacting. But we do see that being one of the motivators in the East Coast and a lot of work to figure out. And so it's not just the crossing structures. I don't think I mentioned that fencing is also an equally important part of this. Provide the areas for safe passage and also appropriately designed fencing where there aren't those opportunities. So it really accomplishes that combined goal of keeping the animals off the road in areas where there isn't a safe opportunity, and that also, has a driver safety component. But yeah, a lot of work out on the East Coast, the Western states, quite a bit as well here.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, I know elk, like, going up to Clear Lake, you might have elk be crossing and stuff like that. And the bad part is they say that don't try to avoid it.
Yeah.
Because your safety and their safety, I mean, you gotta, I don't know. But I avoid animals at all costs. Just saying. But I don't know if anybody else has any comments, but I see another raised hand. You want to go ahead, Jack? Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned the cascading effects of losing a top predator. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Oh, sure. One of the examples is, that we see is I'm going to try to avoid using the Yellowstone example because I think it's been commonly used. But the predators' presence in the landscape, they are preying on certain species, and that will affect the relative abundance of those species. But there's also the behavioral effects of a predator in the landscape where certain animal, let's say I'm an animal that a predator and I'm on the lookout for a predator. I'm going to probably spend less time in a given place or less intensively browsing on vegetation, for example. And so that's going to affect how the plant community persists. And then the other animals that depend on those plants and have relationships with those plants will be affected in turn. So we think about the role of the predator in the landscape as having multiple influences, and we see no matter where in the world that the top predator is removed, we start to see some of those similar signs where the overall processes and relationships in the ecosystem start to be affected, often negatively.
Thank you, Jack, for that question. And thank you, Neil. And I hope you feel better, and really appreciate you being here and all that you do for our four-legged and two-legged and winged and
Thank you very much.
critters that swim and everything. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. This morning has been so amazing. I've learned so much and appreciate everyone for being here. And it's just been, you never know how much information or what we try to give. We're talking about climate, and we try to focus on areas where that aren't normally discussed. So we're talking about climate and biodiversity today, and I am just learning so much and appreciate all the work that our speakers are doing, and working every day to make our lives and all the four-legged critters and all the critters of our Mother Earth healthy and survive. We know we have a lot of work to do in that aspect. Yeah. Thank you, Margot, for being here. And I want to thank my husband's here and my daughter. So that's great. And we can start now again with we're getting towards the end here, but we're not there yet. So we're gonna continue. Wait, my screen is giving me problems. Okay, so we're gonna continue with biodiversity conservation using science, policy, and law. We're gonna hear from Tiffany Yap, the senior scientist, urban wildlands program with the Center for Biologic Diversity. So thank you, Tiffany, for being here. We're looking forward to hearing from you right now.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being invited and getting to talk, and then also seeing all these really wonderful talks. I will share my screen. Hopefully this works out okay.
Another beautiful photo. You all have such beautiful photos. I need to get a better camera.
I'm lucky enough to have other photographers willing to share their photos with me, but yeah, it's fun to get these encounters. All right. Well, thank you so much again for having me. Really appreciate it. Also appreciate Neil very wonderfully setting the stage on the discussion about wildlife connectivity. I will be talking a little bit about that today. But as Cheryl mentioned, I'm Tiffany Yap. I'm a senior scientist in the Urban Wildlands Program at the Center for Biological Diversity. And I'm going to talk to you today about some of our work to conserve biodiversity using science, policy, and law. So first, I just want to give a little bit of background for what the Center for Biological Diversity is. It's a national nonprofit. They have they have an office based out of Oakland, California, which is where I'm located. Our mission is to secure a future for all species, great and small, by using science, law, and creative media to protect the lands, water, and climate that species need to survive. We've been involved with over 600 endangered species listings and over 400 million acres of habitat being protected. And so first, I just want to talk a little bit about that intertwining of climate change and biodiversity. And so climate change is a primary driver of biodiversity loss. We're seeing, as we all know, we're seeing more extreme weather, more heat waves, more extended drought, more severe storms and mass flooding, longer fire seasons, and that's affecting a lot of people. It's affecting us in many different ways, and it's also affecting a lot of wildlife and plants around us. There are shifts in resources on the landscape. We're seeing changes in species physiology and behavior. And scientists estimate that hundreds of climate-related local extinctions have already occurred, and about 82% of key ecological processes are already being affected. But I think what's important to know is while climate change is driving biodiversity loss, biodiversity and healthy ecosystems can help combat climate change. And so these issues are very intertwined. And so today I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the ways my team aims to combat both the biodiversity and climate crises, in part by protecting and enhancing wildlife connectivity and promoting carbon sequestration through diverse habitat conservation. And so these are just a few reports that we've published in the last couple of years that dive into these issues a little bit. And so if folks are interested and want more information, these are publicly available online. Okay, so first I'm going to talk a little bit about the science of wildlife connectivity and carbon sequestration, and then I'm going to get into some of the how we use that science to inform some of the work we use, the work we do with policy and law and legislation. So again, Neil, some of this may be repetitive from Neil's great talk, but just thought I'd go over this again still too anyway. So wildlife connectivity is often defined as the unimpeded movement of species and the flow of natural processes that sustain all life on Earth. And essentially it is giving animals the space and they need and the room to roam to find everything that they need to survive and to thrive. And it's important for a lot of different reasons. Again, to find those resources, food, water, shelter, mates, to get gene flow so that we can keep our populations healthy. And it's also important to support different life stages, to support biodiversity, improve public health and safety, and also allow us to be resilient to climate change. And I think one of the easiest ways to see how we have impacted wildlife connectivity is by looking at our roads. Roads affect so many different species across the board, whether they're wide-ranging large mammals like pumas and bears, or smaller critters like salamanders and butterflies, and even fish are affected because roads often go over streams or rivers. And birds are also affected by our roads. Oftentimes people think, well, birds can fly, so they should be able to fly over the traffic. But there are a lot of low-flying birds that often get hit by roads, or the roads, the noise and the lights from the road are so loud that that birds will avoid the roads, essentially isolating them. And then that leads to potentially dangerous genetic isolation from inbreeding. And so there are all these different ways that roads affect the species around us. But what's really great is that there are proven solutions out there. We know that wildlife crossings, whether they're wildlife bridges or underpasses, culverts, or even these really great elevated road segments for smaller critters like that Yosemite toad in the bottom middle photo. These types of crossings can help us improve wildlife connectivity and allow animals to move to find the resources they need, and get past those roads safely. But it's not just roads that affect wildlife connectivity. The way we built our developments and built our infrastructure also affects the way animals move and have to navigate around us. There's lots of urban biodiversity. There are lots of different kinds of wild. Some animals are more adaptive than others to our presence, but we see them in our backyards, we see them in our gardens, and we can even see them in really highly urbanized areas. And so we want to make sure we're minimizing our impacts to wildlife connectivity in our infrastructure and the way our development is. And so we want to make it more wildlife friendly. And there are also some ways we know that we can do to improve things like that. So for example, we can put markings on windows to reduce the chances of birds colliding into windows. That's how a lot of birds are, especially migratory birds, are killed. We can also work better to reduce night pollution at night so that migrating birds, bats, and insects aren't disoriented when they're flying over our cities, getting to where they need to go. We can also plant more native plants in our backyards, in our gardens, in city parks, at school gardens, to help encourage wildlife to survive closer to us, to help pollinators and birds and all sorts of animals find more food and the resources they need. We can also remove old fencing if we don't need it anymore. But if we do need fencing, we can make fencing more wildlife friendly by making them more visible so that birds don't run into them and get stuck in the barbed wires, or so that animals don't get entangled in them and can safely go under while keeping the livestock or whatever the fence is there for safe as well. We can also take rat poisons or rodenticides off the landscape by encouraging natural predators to help us get rid of pests like rodents. We could put owl boxes up or raptor posts to help them find ways to help us get rid of the rodents that are causing us problems. And for folks who are living out in even more kind of rural areas or even suburban areas, if there are farm animals, we can keep them in predator-proof enclosures at night to reduce conflict with predators like mountain lions or coyotes or foxes. And that way they can move safely around us, and our animals and our families are also safe. All right, so that was just a brief overview of some of the ways or why wildlife connectivity is important and some of the ways we can better coexist to help support that wildlife connectivity and protect it or enhance it. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about carbon sequestration in California's native habitats. So oftentimes when we're talking about finding nature-based solutions to climate change, one thing that comes up a lot is trees, which in some ways makes a lot of sense. Forests store a large amount of carbon and they have really high and significant cultural value. But what happens is sometimes when a development is being proposed, developers will claim to store carbon elsewhere to mitigate destruction of the natural landscapes that they are destroying for that development, forests or otherwise. And unfortunately, some of those mitigation measures, or very common mitigation measures, are proving to be ineffective. One is carbon offsets. So that's paying money to protect forests very far from where the impact is happening. And what we're seeing is that's actually that so far is being ineffective because developers, at least in California, developers are being overcredited by about 30 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents for their offsets. And the reason that's happening is because there are often inaccurate assumptions. So oftentimes, if a developer is just going to bulldoze over mature oak trees, the offsets might be younger oak trees that don't store as much carbon, and so it's not an equal comparison. But not only that, oftentimes the carbon offsets are unenforceable, and logging continues to happen in these areas that are supposed to be protected. Another really common mitigation strategy is large-scale tree planting programs, but unfortunately, while they can be effective, they are often misguided. First of all, it's really important to just acknowledge that seedlings, if you're going to plant trees, seedlings store much less carbon than mature trees. So you have to wait decades to get those carbon gains, if they even happen, because oftentimes these kinds of programs have really high mortality rates. And what we're seeing where they are, not only are there high mortality rates, but there's also reduced biodiversity and water and nutrient availability. And we're also seeing if wildfire does go through these areas, that the wildfire severity is much higher than it should be. These kinds of programs often also take forest stewardship away from indigenous communities and local communities. So these aren't really great solutions to combating the carbon crisis. And unfortunately, another aspect of that is often in those environmental review documents is that when developers are considering their carbon emissions, they're only calculating what's happening in forests, or they're only calculating the forest being destroyed. And unfortunately, trees need help too. While trees can store a lot of carbon and they are really effective at it, they're not immune to the impacts of climate change. They're being affected, tree survival is being affected by climate change. 30% of described trees are threatened with extinction. And as climate change intensifies, we're seeing increased susceptibility to multiple stressors. Trees are succumbing to insects, disease, and wildfire, while also having to deal with higher temperatures. And sometimes, in some cases, higher temperatures are actually reducing carbon capacity of trees. So while it's really important to protect those forests for the biodiversity element and also for their carbon storage capacity, we also need to consider additional solutions because trees need our help too. And what's great is non-forest habitats store significant amounts of carbon and also support a lot of biodiversity. So we conducted a literature review, and I'm not going to go over all these numbers or anything, but the takeaways from this slide is I just wanted to show you that, riparian habitats, native grasslands, shrublands, deserts, they all store significant amounts of carbon. And not only that, but if you look at the map on the right, all the colored areas are areas that are not forest habitats. So again, that's those grasslands and shrublands and desert. And so a lot of California is covered by these non-forest habitats that store a significant amount of carbon, but that are being ignored in the carbon calculations. And they're not being considered as a nature-based solution to climate change when in fact they are storing significant amount of carbon. And I just want to point out these two numbers where, in this literature review, what we found was that native grasslands can store more carbon in their soils than forests store in their trees. And so that's just some food for thought there. There's really high potential for our non-forest habitats to store a lot of carbon. And so from that literature review, we came up with some recommendations. One is that nature-based solutions should include forest and non-forest habitats. And we need to conserve and restore existing intact connected habitats, because if they're connected, their carbon storage efficiency is better. We also would discourage misguided tree planting schemes and unenforceable carbon offsets, and instead protect what's already existing. And also plant native plants in urban areas that lack green space and in communities that have been historically excluded and underserved. And then also, it's really important to get more research on the carbon storage and sequestration capacity of diverse habitats. While there is some out there, there is an amazing diversity of habitats in California and in the world, and we do need to learn. There's definitely opportunity to learn more so that we can really figure out all our tools in the toolbox. And there are multiple benefits that come, or co-benefits that come with protecting diverse habitats and wildlife connectivity. Again, there's that carbon storage and sequestration. these things support biodiversity and healthy ecosystems, and they allow for more equitable access to open space, and they support tribal sovereignty and stewardship. This also helps reduce wildfire risk and increase climate resiliency. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the laws and policies that we work with, and Neil alluded to this, but I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit. So in 2019, the Center for Biological Diversity petitioned for Southern California and Central Coast mountain lions, or pumas, to be listed under the California Endangered Species Act. And they became a candidate species in 2020. So that means they currently receive protections under the California Endangered Species Act, but we do want to get that formal listing as soon as possible. And the reason we petitioned for this species in particular is because scientists were documenting that these species, there are several populations in Southern California and along the Central Coast that are experiencing an extinction vortex that is being driven by lack of connectivity. They're getting hit by cars on our roads. They're dying from rat poisons and disease. They're dying in wildfires. They're being killed in retaliation for killing livestock or farm animals. They're being poached. All these different things are causing this extinction vortex that is essentially leading these subpopulations to have severe inbreeding and severe genetic isolation. So much so that if we don't do anything to improve connectivity, those subpopulations could become extinct within decades. And so with the CESA protections, these kinds of protections can help to preserve and enhance existing connectivity by getting more wildlife crossings on roads where we know, in areas where we know they're needed, and get more wildlife-friendly infrastructure in place. They would also help reduce conflict with people and limit rat poisons on the landscape. And then here are some of the science-driven policy and legislation work that we do. My team works on California state bills, and in the past couple of years, we've had several bills passed, which has been great. We co-sponsored the Safe Roads and Wildlife Protection Act in 2022. And what that does is it requires the California Department of Transportation and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to work together to identify priority areas on our state highways that need wildlife crossings, and to get resources to make those crossings happen. There's also the California Ecosystems Protection Act of 2020 and 2023, and those bills help restrict the use of rodenticides on our landscapes. And this year, we're working on other bills that are related to the previous ones that are passed. So the Room to Roam Act, again, we're co-sponsoring with Wildlands Network, and that builds off of the Safe Roads and Wildlife Protection Act, where it requires local governments, so cities and counties, to consider wildlife connectivity in their general plans. And that's so that, when wildlife crossings are being built, it's really important that there's really good habitat on both sides of the crossing so that the animals will use it. And so with the Room to Roam Act, it's really important, if those crossings are being made, that general plans plan for them in their planning process, so that can remain open, so that the crossings can remain functional. And we're also sponsoring the Poison-Free Wildlife Act, which again addresses limiting rodenticides on the landscape. And we also work on regional ordinances like the Ventura County Wildlife Movement and Habitat Connectivity Ordinances and the City of LA Wildlife Ordinance. Okay, and then last, we also use laws to help fight poorly planned development. So laws like the California Environmental Quality Act and the California Endangered Species Act, but other laws as well. So I'm not going to go over all these projects, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a snapshot list of some of the projects that we've worked on, where we've seen biodiversity conservation and wildlife connectivity outcomes. whether it was through legal agreements to protect certain areas or projects getting blocked by judges after our lawsuits. And these range throughout California. There's some in Northern California, Southern California, but also they range in size. Some are 28 acres, but they can be as large as 12,000 acres. And they encompass a wide variety of species and habitats, whether it's pumas, western pond turtles, California red-legged frogs, checker spot butterflies, riparian areas, native grasslands, shrublands, oak woodlands. And so this is just something that I think really is driven by a lot of the science that I was speaking about earlier. And this kind of encompasses a lot of the work we do in the Urban Wildlands Program at the Center for Biological Diversity. And so with that, well, thank you so much for your time and attention. And again, thank you, Cheryl, for having me speak today. And thank you to all the speakers. If folks want more information, here's a list of the Puma CISA petition and some of those reports that I mentioned that should be easily available online. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Wow, again, like I said, I've been saying this, but it's true. I'm still learning. And there's so much to learn, And I just wish that, people like, with all this development and all the trees that are cutting, and I look at the trees and I say, oh my goodness, the trees look so sad. And it was so nice when it rained and they all perked back up, and we need that again. And then, I don't know, lately I see a lot of tree cutting. And that kind of disturbs me. Although I'm in here in Berkeley, near San Pablo Avenue, and when they were trimming, and I was like, oh no, they're trimming the trees. But then when I looked, they did such an excellent job, this company. I was like, oh wow, the tree looks happier. I don't know, I noticed things about plants. So I was like, wow, the tree does look happier. So these guys did a good job, but then there's the butchers that do it too. So anyway, thank you. And I'm just like grateful for this today because I've been more cognizant of insects and animals and trees and plants, and now I'm just been be more loving and caring for our other relatives. So thank you. And does anybody have any questions for Liz? I mean Liz, Tiffany, sorry. Like I said, I haven't had all my coffee today. And this morning's just been so rich, so amazing. But I guess not. So we'll just continue on. I don't see any hands raised. And I appreciate all the participants that have been here this morning. And there's so many links in the chat. I'm trying to capture them. And if everyone will share their slides with me, when we send out the recording, we'll include your slides and all these links. Anyway, but lastly, but not least, we have one more person to talk about BioBlitz, Martha Artlett Serta, a naturalist from Tilden Nature Area, if you're in the Bay Area. She's from the East Bay Regional Park District. And we're going to be partnering with them in September 28th to do a BioBlitz at Tilden Nature Area at 9 a.m. till noon, I believe. Just the same hours as this, as our series. So we're looking forward to that, and we're going to hear from Martha about that right now. Thank you, Martha, for being here.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks so much for having me here. Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Martha Cerda. I use she, her, ella pronouns. And like Cheryl mentioned, I'm a naturalist with the East Bay Regional Park District at the Tilden Nature Area. Just very excited, and also what a gift it's been this morning to listen to all of the wonderful speakers and also the questions on the chat. It's really energizing to be part of a community who cares so much about our environment and shares their collective work to straighten our community. So thank you everybody so much. It's been really great hearing all about your work. And like Cheryl mentioned, the East Bay Regional Park District is partnering with the CEMTF chapter and the United Nations chapter, as well as it's the UC Berkeley Student Environmental Resource Center. They're sponsoring this event. We are going to be leading a BioBlitz at Tilden Nature Area, nudged in the Berkeley Hills. It's a 740-acre preserve that is full of life. And today we've been hearing all about the power and importance of preserving and conserving biodiversity. As part of my role as a naturalist, my job is to connect people to their parks. The East Bay Regional Park District is a wonderful special district that manages over 73 parks, 125,000 acres of land that spans 2 counties, Contra Costa and Alameda County. And these are all parks that are paid for by taxpayers' dollars. And I highly encourage every single one of you, if you have the opportunity, to get out to your parks and connect with the natural world. Now, BioBlitz are essentially programs organized by agencies, individuals, really anybody can do it. You essentially gather a group of people to connect with nature and snap photos of anything and everything that's living. So this goes from plants to animals and fungi, some lichen, and on September 28th, that's a Saturday from 9 to 12, we will be gathering as a community to learn about the wildlife at Tilden Nature Area, catalog or document these species. And why BioBlitzes are so important to our communities is that they provide a snapshot of biodiversity in a given location. This is going to be a special one-day event, but I encourage all of you to join other BioBlitzes. There's many across really the world. Everybody does these events and they're completely free. They're really places for people to connect again with the outdoors, especially folks that perhaps haven't had opportunities to access the outdoors. The hike or walk that we have planned for this BioBlitz at Tilden Nature Area is completely accessible. It's completely flat, so all levels of learners are welcomed. And there's going to be experts that will be helping lead along the way, noting what type of wildlife is on the trail. We're also going to be gathering around towards the end of the event. And if you were unsure on your walk what you saw, but you have a picture, we will discuss what exactly you spotted. All of that is going to be contributing to the iNaturalist app, which is an app that is completely free to use for folks. You can download it on your phone, on a tablet, or you can access it online. And why these BioBlitzes, again, are so important is that they help us make better decisions when it comes to conservation and land management practices. The East Bay Regional Park District has a really neat document called Nature Check, which is essentially a health access document that tells us how wildlife is doing in the East Bay. If you're curious to learn more about that, I'm going to drop it on the chat. Again, this program is only possible because of the collective care and knowledge and really willpower of so many people. So we're just really excited to get a chance to connect with one another. If you're not able to make it on this day, like I said before, feel free to look up online, BioBlitzes in your area. They're everywhere. And I'm sure you'll get a lot of joy and a lot of knowledge in not only being with folks that love nature, that have so much knowledge to share, but as we all know, parks and nature make us feel happy and joyful, and it's a great way for us to connect with what's right outside our backyard. and you'd be contributing to community science. So we want to make sure that people feel empowered to not only connect with their parks in the outdoors, but have a part to play in conservation. And BioBlitzes are a great way to do that. If you have any questions, I'm also going to be dropping down my email and my phone number. This is a completely free event, so please join us. And again, thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you, Martha. And we're so looking forward to it. My children are adults now, 36 and 31, but I just remember going on those field trips up at Tilden and being responsible for like, 6 or 8 little girls and boys and walking around with the naturalists and just having so much fun. So it's bringing me back. And I just love going up there. It's just like only a few minutes away and you're in a whole nother world. So, and appreciate it's also next to the little farm. So if you have little ones, come join us. And if anybody on this call wants to lead a group, we could use that. And you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, because we are expecting 50 or more people to join us, the more the merrier. We are going to be dividing into smaller groups that are each going to be with an expert that will help educate along the way and lead essentially the walk until we all gather back collectively to see what we actually documented out in Tilden Nature Area. So if you are curious of if this is something for you, you can always give me a call or email me for further details. But essentially, as an expert, you would be, again, leading this walk with about 10 to 15 people. And you'd be sharing your expertise, whether it's birds, plants, mammals, fungi, whatever it is. We would truly appreciate it if you join us.
Yes, thank you, thank you. And so me specifically, there's a couple people on this call that are local, so I'm not going to call out your names. You know who you are. So please contact us and we'll hope to see you then. But in the meantime, I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank our amazing, incredible speakers this morning. Kim for the land acknowledgement, Leonida, who came from Kenya, and Karis, who's in, as I call it, lower Alabama area, Orange County, and Liz and Neil and Tiffany, who's in the Bay, and Neil's in the Bay or close to it. And Martha, it's just been such an amazing, inspirational, and you laid down so much knowledge for us to go back and replay, which you can because we have recorded this. And if all y'all share your PowerPoints, I will include that in the recording once we get it back. And it looks like we're about to end a little early, but just to let you know what's coming up next for CEMTF. We have our continuation of the 5th virtual summit series, Climate, Colonization, and Rights for Humans and Nature, United Actions for a Just and Regenerative Future. Today it was Climate and Biodiversity, September 20th, my husband's birthday, is going to be Climate and Health. And then in November, we're going to have on November 15th, Climate and Fascism. In 2025, January 17th, Climate and Education. And then on March 21st, my 37th anniversary, is climate, youth, and seniors. So, and don't forget the BioBlitz, September 28th at the Tilden Nature Area at Tilden Park in the East Bay Regional Parks District in Berkeley. And if you can download the iNaturalist app beforehand, or just be with someone that has it on their phone, you don't have to have it, but it's better if you do. But anyway, it should be a fun day and a great day, and we're looking forward to it. It's always great to be out in nature, and that's something I would suggest for all of us for our mental health. We're in some tumultuous times. It's been this way for quite some time now, with the climate crisis and the rising temperatures and sea level rise and flooding and earthquakes and hurricanes and all the things that are impacting us and others around the world. Please take care of yourself. I see you have your hand raised, Jack.
Yeah, I just want to, before we go, a couple things. I want to give a real big shout out to Leonida because she stayed on the call, and it must be pushing midnight by now in Kenya. So that was really, and she just put her contact in the chat. So that is a reminder. It's a good idea to save the chat. There's a lot of stuff in there today. So we will send out a recording of the morning program, but it's nice to have the chat stuff too, if you want to save it right now. And Cheryl, we do have a couple short videos. Did you want to show those, or what do you want to do with it? What do you want to do now?
Yeah, we can show, sure, either go for it. And
okay, so we knew we had a little time today, and we thought, well, we've got a couple of really good videos. One's from the UN Association, and the other is the Native American speaker. Do you know who the name of that speaker is? It's an Instagram.
I do not. I just happened to find it on Instagram. I was like, oh, this is a beautiful ending. So, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to show that right now, and let everybody have a chance to see what you're talking about.
And we'll send out all these links. I've been capturing all the links in the chat and the videos and everything and the presentations if they share. So thank you. Go ahead, Jack.
The best teacher is the water, the trees, the wind. It's as simple as going to a river, an ocean, and putting your hands in there. It's as simple as that. And then those who are in a forest like this is actually touching a mother tree. And what happens inside you, it triggers the spiritual awakening that has been covered, has been fought to be taken out of you. Because once you turn up the volume, and from what colonization has done, then you hear, and you hear the spirits. Don't forget that, because it was everywhere, not just here among Native people. It was everywhere. I don't care what preacher, I don't care what medicine man, shaman, we're humans. And the best teacher to wake you up is Mother Earth. The best teacher is the water, the trees, the wind.
Okay, so that was the first one we wanted to share. Let me see if I can find the other one. This is the second one is from the United Nations Association.
It's from the World Wildlife Federation.
Oh, World Wildlife Federation. Here it comes.
Wide, peaked behind every star. Every part of our big wide universe we've explored makes one thing clear. Earth is like nothing else. But why is our shared home so unique? Life, all kinds of life, and its incredible variety. Our planet is full of it. From the birds boasting big broad wings flying high above us in the skies, to the life beneath our feet, so small we might miss it if we blink. Animals, plants, and all the places and spaces they call home make up the rich variety of life on Earth. And this, known as biodiversity, keeps our planet intact. But today, we are losing biodiversity, and quickly. This doesn't just mean we see one-of-a-kind species and spaces disappear. It puts us in danger too. So what's driving this biodiversity loss? And where do we go from here? Right now, over 1 million plant and animal species are threatened with extinction, and the average population sizes of wildlife have dropped by around 70% since 1970. We've already lost half of the world's corals and lose forest areas the size of 27 football fields every minute. So what's causing all this? There are 5 key drivers of biodiversity loss. Let's start with the biggest: changes in land and sea use, especially for food production. We all need to eat, but the intensive and unsustainable way we currently produce food sees us degrade and destroy precious environments that are critical for people and nature. Already about 40% of our habitable land is used for agriculture, for livestock, and for crops that feed both people and livestock. And that's just one of the ways that our land and sea use threatens nature. Overexploiting species via harvesting or hunting and poaching is another reason we're losing biodiversity. Overfishing, for example, is happening at such a large scale, nearly a third of all monitored global fish stocks are now overfished. If we keep this up, this would spell disaster for marine ecosystems, as well as the more than 3 billion people globally who rely on fish for their primary source of protein. And that's not all. Pollution is threatening our blue planet too. There are many sources of pollution. Take plastic, for example. Our rivers and lakes are overflowing with it, and over 14 million tons make their way into our oceans every year. This impacts marine environments and the many plants and animals which live there, species which keep our planet in balance. When these spaces are polluted, species suffer, so we lose them. Our warming climate is also bad for biodiversity. The climate crisis creates more severe weather and increases the likelihood of hurricanes, floods, droughts, and wildfires, which can be catastrophic for natural habitats. Changing temperatures not only affect habitats, they can disrupt how species reproduce or migrate, triggering these events when conditions aren't ideal. This puts their survival at risk, and it puts our planet where everything works together at risk too. These changes in climate, along with our increased transport and travel globally, can also cause invasive species to spread to new areas. These then compete with native species for space, food, and more, or spread diseases, further lowering their odds of survival. We know what you're thinking. There's a lot threatening biodiversity, but there are a lot of us too. And if we work together, all 8 billion of us have the power to turn things around. For this to happen, we need world leaders to spark change on a global scale. This year, they have a once-in-a-decade opportunity to light that very spark. A spark that will set in motion a wave of global action and awareness like never before. The United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity 15th Conference of the Parties, or COP15 for short, is happening this year. There, world leaders and key decision makers will meet to determine global efforts for biodiversity in the decade ahead. We need them to approve and commit to an ambitious global plan to reverse biodiversity loss and secure a nature-positive world by 2030. A world where there is more nature tomorrow than there is today. It's critical we mend our broken relationship with nature by the end of this decade to avoid the worst impacts of biodiversity loss and global warming. Nature is, after all, one of our biggest allies against the climate crisis. To make it happen, this global plan to protect biodiversity and reverse biodiversity loss must be comprehensive. Like the Paris Agreement is for climate change, it must be science-based, it must be ambitious, and it must benefit all. The decisions world leaders make or don't make at COP15 will determine our relationship with nature and our own futures for decades to come. Till then, we must continue to act, spread awareness, and encourage others to do the same. We are and always have been part of the equation. Now, let's be part of the solution. Share this video to spread the word.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Thank you, Jack. So yeah, I want to again thank Leonida, Kim, let me see my list here. Karis, Liz, Neil, Tiffany, and Martha. And look for the BioBlitz on September 8th at Tilden Nature Area from 9 to noon. iNaturalist app will send out the instructions. I did drop it in the chat, but I'll send out all this information and all the links. And if all the speakers share their slides, I'll send that too when we send out the recording. And remember, upcoming in September on the 20th is climate and health. And our next CEMTF general meeting will be September 18th. And I want to really appreciate Jack and Karina, who worked tirelessly with myself to put on these series, and for hanging in there. Like I said, we're 5 years old now. We had a birthday on February 9th. And hopefully before the end of the year, we'll be celebrating that in person somewhere, someplace. So stay tuned, and stay tuned for climate and health, climate and fascism, climate and education, climate, youth, and seniors, and the BioBlitz on the 28th of September. So have a blessed day. We're still in COVID. We're enduring a genocide. Free Palestine, free all the occupied territories. Let's get rid of settler colonialism. Capitalism has led us to all these disparities and, terrible things. So we have a lot of work to do, and we have to stay in community and stay unified. Community has the word unity in it. So we need to be in unity and in solidarity, because one struggle somewhere is our struggle too. So the distance doesn't matter. We all need to be free. We all need to live our lives, have roofs over our heads, have food that we can live on and eat and heal with, use to heal ourselves. And we have a lot of work to do, and a lot of learning, and a lot of sharing, and a lot of solidarity, and a lot of unity. So and we have to remember to vote, and I know the choices are bad, but you got to do what you can do. And if you can, just do what you can do. And have a blessed day, everyone. It's almost 12 o'clock, so we're right on time. And as you know, this is the first in the 5 series, and all of them have been amazingly great, if I do say so myself. But I think that you also agree. So all the recordings are on the CEMTF website under resources. And you enjoy the rest of your day. Get out in nature, hug a tree, it is a really good feeling when you do things like that, and listen to the birds and appreciate them and the little insects and the everything. So land back. Have a blessed day, everyone.